Well, building a flood-proof causeway in northern Victoria has emerged as a priority for locals taking part in an inquiry into devastating floods last October. A public hearing in Shepparton has heard residents, businesses and organisations were severely affected by flooded roadways.
Looking back to move forward, residents in northern Victoria reflect on floods that devastated local communities in October last year.
Obviously, the October flood was a big event. It was shorter than COVID, but it was in some ways much more intense.
Victoria's third consecutive La Niña weather system triggered the state's wettest month on record and subsequent destructive flooding. The inquiry is analysing what caused or contributed to the flooding and the adequacy and effectiveness of early warning systems.
I think that it really does need a very visionary approach. I think it's high time. We can't keep repeating the same scenarios. We know by the very nature of where we are that these things are going to happen.
Public hearings held in Rochester, Echuca and Shepparton have heard from more than 60 witnesses. In Shepparton, two major issues have been in focus: levee banks and building a second causeway to cross the Goulburn River.
Biggest city on Victoria's biggest river, extremely vulnerable.
A large section of the Midland Highway was impacted by floodwaters in October last year, cutting off access between Mooroopna and Shepparton and severely impacting transit and operations right across the state, including some areas that weren't impacted by the floodwaters. A separate flood-resistant causeway was approved in 2016, dubbed the Shepparton Bypass. 7 years on, and Council says no real progress has been made, despite increased calls for the work to be done. Communication concerns were continuously raised, with particular focus on multicultural residents.
We need to make people aware of those events who don't have Facebook, who can't use computers and don't use their mobile phones and don't check their letterbox. We need to think about everyone and those who don't understand English.
Ensuring smaller regional towns and properties around Shepparton have adequate support was another overarching issue.
When a flood's about to approach you and you're a farmer out at Undira, you don't care about the rules and regulations.
No.
All you care about is your cows and your pigs and your sheep and your crop that you've put in, and how the best can we protect them.
The committee will hand down its recommendations in June 2024. Public hearings will continue in Seymour on Thursday. Holly Edward-Smith for Sky News in Shepparton.
OK, joining us live from Canberra now is the Shepparton Mayor Shane Sali. Shane, good to see you. Thanks for your time this morning. So when's this causeway going to get done?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Pete. Yeah, it's a good question, and obviously it's been in the pipeline for a number of years now, and that was obviously highlighted at yesterday's flood inquiry that, you know, it's impossible for a city the size of Greater Shepparton that has a significant part within Victoria, its connection point, that when the flood turned up here in our region and obviously, you know, completely cut us off, not only did it impact Shepparton and Mooroopna, the two biggest cities in Greater Shepparton, but it disconnected a big portion of regional Victoria. So we need a second river crossing that's sitting within that 90-day review with Minister King, and we're really confident that what's taken place last year through the flood event and the many years of advocacy that we've been doing, that money will still be within the budget post that review.
Sounds like it's still years away, though.
Yeah, it is. I mean, but look, we've got to get to a point of where the decision can be made regarding the infrastructure. So that's what we're getting to. And, you know, we understand how important it is. And I mean, last year, the flood event highlighted what happens when you've got infrastructure that sits, you know, below that, you know, really extreme flood event. You can't have a regional city like Greater Shepparton disconnected, which, as I mentioned, completely disrupts the whole state of Victoria.
OK, you're in Canberra today in light of the Water Amendment Bill introduced to Parliament last week. Just tell us about your concerns about it. I was under the impression that Victoria would have been carved out of changes to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, but what's your concerns moving forward?
Yeah, obviously major concerns with what's been announced, obviously with the buyback proposal for the additional 450 gigs. It was never really a part of the original basin discussion. So, you know, we're deeply concerned. Obviously, I'm a concerned mayor from the food bowl of Australia and what that would do to our region if more water was to be taken away. And I think what needs to be explained clearly is that what the water is going to be used for, obviously the environmental purposes, won't be met either. I mean, we can't get that water to those environmental needs. And I think what hasn't been discussed, and something that, you know, we need to be really clear about, is if we want to have some environmental measures being put in place with buybacks, we've got to be really focusing on where the issues are from an environmental perspective, and that's in the Darling River. That's where we're seeing 20 to 30 million fish kills, not only this year but last year. And no one seems to be talking about that. So I guess that's what we're here to discuss and I guess outline not only to the people watching, but to people here in Canberra that are making the decisions that if you're going to rip water out of communities like ours in the Golden Valley, you're going to destroy the food bowl of Australia, you're not going to meet those environmental needs, and you're not going to have the money to be able to do it. This is possibly a $10 billion buyback investment from the federal government in the middle of a cost of living crisis. I don't know where that money is coming from, and I'm really confused as to how Minister Plibersek can justify that type of investment.
Right, but I thought Victoria was excluded from the changes.
No, so whether Victoria or you or I agree with buybacks or not, that can't stop the federal government effectively coming over us and knocking on the door of everyday farmers and buying water. That's the reality of it. You can't stop the federal government from buying water out in an open market, and that's what we're concerned about, is that they can knock on the door, purchase that water, and it's going to rip apart the food bowl of Australia, and we're here to be loud and clear that there are the measures that should be looked at, and by that I mean is Victoria and the Southern Basin has done a lot of the heavy lifting, and no one seems to be talking about the Darling and what is happening beyond our point.
Well, what would you prefer to be put in place then? Leave things as is?
I think the 450, the buyback, well, as I mentioned, if you look at what's already been delivered, which is the 2,100 gigs, and 1,800 of that has already come from the Southern. Northern hasn't obviously contributed enough to this point, and that's where the environmental issues sit within the Darling. We haven't got the 20 to 30 million fish kills along our river, and to meet those expectations, to have those flows come down our river, if that was to take place, would destroy our riverbanks. You've virtually got to have a minor flood to meet these water flows. And I think that what we're talking about is that if you take away water, you minimise production, which obviously then drives up the price of your everyday goods that your shoppers are being able to purchase now, your apples, your pears, your oranges. When they increase, not only do you hit the Australian people with a $10 billion buyback tag, you're then going to hit them again when they go to the supermarket and want to buy their fresh fruit and veg because prices are going to increase. I don't know how this can support cost of living. I don't know how this aligns with any Labor policy, and I don't know how any decision makers can sit here and accept what's being proposed.
Okay. Shane, appreciate it. We'll talk to you again soon.